Welcome to Module 4A, Acoustics and Psychoacoustics. Before we begin, please consider: what is delay, echo, and reverberation? Are they the same thing? How do the above characteristics influence our perception of sound? After completing this module, you should be able to explain the differences between direct, early, and reverberant sound, apply the rudimentary principles of acoustics in producing program material, and explain the acoustic considerations in building a recording studio or a control room. Acoustics is the science of sound. It deals with the generation, the transmission, the reception, and the effects of sound. Psychoacoustics deals with the human perception of sound. It is concerned with our subjective response to sound. We know sound is omnidirectional. That is, we can hear sound from any direction. We can determine direction because our ears are separated by our head. So if we have sound coming from one direction, let's say the right, it reaches our right ear first, which means it takes longer to get to our left ear. So there is a difference in time. Also, because our head is between our ears, our head creates an acoustic shadow, and the sound reaching the left ear is not quite as loud as the sound reaching the right ear. So there is an intensity difference. It is this time difference and the intensity difference that allows us to hear spatially, to detect what direction sound is coming from. We hear binaurally, and binaural is three-dimensional hearing: left-right, front-back, up-down. Stereo, on the other hand, is one-dimensional sound, which we fake to make it sound like it's two-dimensional. So when we hear sound in a room, we hear the direct sound, the sound that arrives at our ears first. We also hear the reflected sound, which arrives at our ears later after bouncing off of walls, ceilings, and floors. Notice that the time it takes for the reflected sound to reach our ear is longer than the time it is for the direct sound to reach our ear. One more time, a little more slowly. Let's take a better look at this. The direct sound goes out without hitting any walls or surfaces. The first reflections we get back into the microphone are probably from the floor or the ceiling. Sound bouncing off the nearest wall is the next to come back to the microphone, and the further away the walls are, the longer it takes the sound to bounce back to the microphone. These are the early reflections. We also have later reflections created by sound bouncing off of multiple surfaces before it's returned back to the microphone. As these later reflections build up, the reflections become indistinguishable, and together they create a reverberant field. So reverberation is the sum of all these densely spaced reflections, which build up and create a dense reverberant field. A persistence of sound. The amount of reverberation we have depends upon the size and the shape of the room, and also upon the materials of the reflecting surfaces. For example, more sound will bounce off of a concrete floor than off of a carpeted floor. Reverberation affects how we perceive sound. It also affects the intelligibility of speech. The amount of reverberation can be determined by what's known as the reverberation time, which is one of the most important acoustic measurements for determining the characteristics of a room. Reverberation time is the time required for reverberation to decay by 60 decibels of sound pressure level from the amplitude of the original direct sound after that direct sound has stopped. Let's look at a picture of this. Reverberation is usually measured using a sharp, loud sound, like the sound of a starter pistol. After the initial sound, the reverberant sound continues until it eventually fades away. So the amount of time it takes for the initial intensity to drop by 60 decibels is our reverberation time, RT sub 60. In the example, we see that it took about 1 second for the sound to drop off 60 decibels. Reverberation is often confused with echo, but they are two different things. Reverberation is the buildup of all these indistinguishable reflections, whereas echo is a distinctly individual sound that has been delayed by 35 milliseconds or more. Another interesting phenomenon which you find in small rooms is flutter echoes. Flutter echoes are short delays in very rapid succession. So we have direct, early, and reverberant sound. The direct sound, of course, reaches the listener first, followed by the early reflections, often called pre-delay. These early reflections add loudness and fullness to the direct sound. They add to the direct sound, and it produces a sense of the room size. The reverberant sound, which builds up over time, contains much of the sound's total energy output, and it provides the listener a sense of how far away they are from the source of the sound. The closer to the sound, the more direct sound. The further away, the more reverberant sound. We can see the effect of this in this graph. We start with the initial impulse sound, followed by our first reflections, then by early reflections, later reflections, and then finally the reverberant field. Again, notice this concept of pre-delay. We'll see that again. So what makes the perfect room for recording? We'll find that it very much depends on what kind of material you're recording. Every room has a different sound. Classical music usually requires a very reverberant sound. Rock music, on the other hand, is usually recorded in a very dead room. And if you're doing automatic dialogue replacement for a movie, you want a room that has no sound, totally dead. Live rooms are those with reverberation times of more than 1 second. This tends to reinforce the sound to make it louder, more powerful. It also diffuses the detail and masks inaccuracies. Dead rooms or dry rooms are those with reverb times of less than a half a second. Here the sound is relatively lifeless, which is why they call it dead. Under such conditions, it's very easy to hear inaccuracies. The bass guy misses a note, you hear that. Artificial reverb is usually added in the mixdown process. Before we continue on, please consider, can you explain how reverberation affects music and spoken word? Do you know what pre-delay is and why it's used? If so, I invite you to continue on to Module 4B, Acoustic Design.